This audiobook is not based on myth, and it is not based on European textbooks. It is grounded in North African records, West African oral tradition, and Afrocentric scholarship. In the spirit of thinkers like Henrik Clarke, the story you're about to hear comes from North African historians, African griots, and scholars who refuse to let this history be erased. This is not fantasy. This is documented African civilization. Chapter 1. After Ghana. Shifting power in West Africa, 1000 CE to 1235 CE. How Mali was prepared, not yet born. The Mali Empire did not appear suddenly before Mali rose. West Africa entered a long period of transition. This story begins after Ghana, not with a new empire, but with a vacuum. For centuries, the Ghana Empire had regulated gold, controlled trade routes, and balanced power between peoples, merchants, and rulers. Its system was not perfect, but it was stable. When Ghana weakened after 1000 CE, that stability cracked. Not all at once, not through conquest, but through gradual loss of control. Trade routes shifted. Caravans began bypassing Ghana's royal centers. Gold moved along new paths, and power followed. Muslim merchant communities already living in West Africa were positioned to benefit from this shift. They did not invade. They did not overthrow Ghana. They redirected trade. They strengthened ties to North Africa, expanded contracts, used literacy and long-distance networks to move wealth more efficiently. As this happened, local political authority weakened. Traditional systems that once regulated land, labor, and justice lost influence over the gold economy. This created imbalance, not religious war, not cultural replacement, but economic pressure. Communities that once thrived now found themselves excluded from decisions about their own resources. Gold still came from African land, but control over its movement was slipping away. This tension reshaped society. Old loyalties fractured. Local rulers competed for access to trade. Protection replaced cooperation. Into this unstable world, new power structures began to rise. Not yet empires, not yet Mali, but transitional regimes. One of them would dominate this period. A force born from fragmentation, driven by control rather than balance. Their rule would be short, their methods harsh, and their legacy would reveal a truth that West African history teaches again and again. Stability builds empires. Imbalance destroys them. This is the world that followed Ghana, and this is the world that set the stage for the Soso. Chapter 2. The Soso Interlude and a Fractured World, 1180 CE to 1235 CE. After Ghana weakened, power did not disappear overnight. It shifted. Trade routes changed. Political balance broke, and the region entered a period of instability. Out of this chaos rose the Soso. The Soso were not Muslims. They followed traditional West African spiritual systems, ancestor reverence, sacred kingship, local ritual authority. But their rise was shaped by something new. Trade, when Ghana declined. Muslim merchant communities already living in West Africa did not conquer the region. They redirected trade routes. They favored safer paths, new markets, and new political partners. Gold began moving away from old Ghana centers. Some local elites understood what this meant. Control the land, cooperate with the traders, control the wealth. Among those elites were leaders within the Soso ruling class. Here's where instability began. Muslim traders brought long-distance trade connections, contracts and record-keeping, literacy in Arabic, access to markets across North Africa and the Mediterranean. The Soso elite provided military protection, territorial control, enforcement power over trade routes. This was not religious conversion. It was economic alignment, but it came at a cost. The Soso state, especially under Sumanguru Kanti, ruled through fear rather than balance. Heavy tribute, harsh punishments, centralized force without legitimacy. Traditional authority was disrupted. Local chiefs were overridden. Communities were exploited rather than integrated. This created resentment. The Soso ruled territory, but they did not command loyalty. They controlled trade routes, but not the trust of the people. This is why their power was short-lived. The Soso period lasted less than 60 years. A brief moment, a fragile dominance. History shows a pattern. When power is built on force alone, when wealth flows without legitimacy, and when elites serve trade over people, states do not last. Instability creates short civilizations, and from that instability, a new empire began to rise. One rooted not just in control, but in unity. Sundiata and the Mali Empire. Chapter 3, Sundiata and the Fall of the Soso. 1230 CE to 1235 CE. Sundiata Keita did not rise from comfort. He was born into royal blood, but not into power. His father came from a lineage that once ruled, yet court politics shifted against his mother. She was replaced as queen, and with that decision, Sundiata and his family were pushed to the margins, according to oral tradition. Sundiata spent his early years in exile, watching power from a distance, learning patience instead of privilege. As he grew, the world around him hardened. The Soso state, under Sumanguru Kanti, controlled key territories left vulnerable after Ghana's decline. Sumanguru ruled through fear, heavy tribute, and strict control of land and labor. For many communities, life became unpredictable and oppressive. This was not a clash of religions. It was a struggle over authority, over land, and over who had the right to rule. Sundiata understood something crucial. Power did not come from terror alone. It came from unity. As he returned from exile, he did not march alone. He formed alliances with manned clans, former rivals, and communities tired of instability. Each group brought something different. Fighters, strategists, resources, and local knowledge. What Sundiata built was not just an army. It was a coalition. In 1235 CE, these forces met the Soso at the Battle of Kirina. Oral tradition describes a turning point, not just a military defeat, but the collapse of Sumanguru's authority. His power, built on isolation and fear, could not withstand coordinated resistance. With the Soso defeated, control of the region shifted again, but this time, it did not fall into fragmentation. It moved toward consolidation. Sundiata did not claim victory for himself alone. He laid the groundwork for a new political order, one based on shared responsibility, council governance, and legitimacy rooted in lineage and consent. The Soso chapter had ended, and in its place, a new empire was ready to emerge, not through chaos, but through coordination, not through fear, but through structure. Mali was no longer an idea. It was becoming reality. Chapter 4, The Birth of the Mali Empire. 1235 CE to 1300 CE. Sundiata's victory over the Soso did not end chaos overnight. It ended fragmentation. What followed was not revenge, but reconstruction. After 1235 CE, Sundiata Keita began uniting the lands that had been divided for generations. Former rivals were brought into alliance, chiefdoms were reorganized, Trade routes were secured again, not through fear, but through structure. This was the true birth of Mali. Sundiata did not rule as a conqueror alone. He ruled as a lawgiver. At the heart of his system was the Kuru Khan Fuga Charter, an oral constitution that laid out principles of governance, justice, and social responsibility. It established protection of life and lineage, limits on abuse of power, shared responsibility between rulers and communities, respect for land, labor, and tradition. Power was no longer concentrated in one violent center. It was distributed. Mali became a federation, a network of peoples bound by law, trade, and mutual obligation. The capital, Niani, grew into a political and cultural hub. Gold flowed again, but this time under a system designed to prevent monopoly and instability. Islam existed within Mali, but it did not dominate it. Traditional spiritual systems remained central to governance. Ancestral authority, ritual specialists, and griots still guided legitimacy and memory. Mali's strength came from balance between old and new, between trade and tradition, between authority and accountability. By the end of the 13th century, Mali was no longer emerging. It was established, a regional power with organized leadership, protected trade routes, and a political vision rooted in African governance. The foundation had been set. What came next would make Mali known across the world. Chapter 5. Mali enters the world stage. 1300 CE. What came next would make Mali known across the world. Not through conquest alone, not through legend or exaggeration, but through wealth so vast, it reshaped global markets, and through knowledge so deep, it pulled scholars, traders, and diplomats from across continents. By the early 1300s, Mali was no longer just a West African power. It was global. Gold from Mali did not stay in Africa. It flowed north across the Sahara, into North Africa, into the Mediterranean, into the Middle East. Entire economies became dependent on West African gold. Markets adjusted, currencies shifted, and Mali became impossible to ignore. But Mali was not only exporting gold, it was exporting stability. Its trade routes were organized, its laws were enforced, its cities were safe for merchants. Traveling thousands of miles, caravans crossed the desert, not only to exchange goods, but to connect worlds. Ideas moved with them. Books, mathematics, law, astronomy, spiritual thought. Mali's cities became meeting points for Africa, North Africa, and the wider Islamic world. Scholars came to study, merchants came to invest, diplomats came to negotiate. By this time, the name Mali carried weight. It meant order. It meant wealth. It meant knowledge. And at the center of this rising influence stood a line of rulers whose authority extended far beyond their borders, not because they ruled the world, but because the world was now watching them. What followed next was not an accident. It was the result of generations of preparation, and it would soon redefine how history remembered Africa. Chapter 6. The Mansis and the Art of Rule. 1300 CE. Mali was not ruled by force alone. It was ruled by balance. At the top of the empire stood the Mansa, a title meaning king, but also guardian, judge, and protector of the land. A Mansa did not rule like a tyrant. He ruled through systems. Power in Mali was layered. Authority flowed through councils, through clan leaders, through religious scholars, and through tradition. A Mansa was expected to listen, to govern with restraint, to protect trade routes, to settle disputes, to uphold spiritual law, and most importantly, to maintain harmony. Succession was not random. Mali followed structured royal lineages, but legitimacy did not come from blood alone. It came from acceptance, from elders, from nobles, from spiritual authorities. A ruler who lost balance, lost support. This is why Mali endured. The empire did not depend on one man. It depended on order. Every Mansa inherited systems built before him. Laws, trade agreements, military organization, and social customs refined over generations. But there is something missing from most retellings of Mali's story, because while Mansas sat on thrones, they did not rule alone. Behind the court, behind succession, behind diplomacy and legitimacy, stood women. Women shaped lineage. Women preserved memory. Women stabilized power. Mothers determined royal legitimacy. Sisters influenced alliances. Women controlled markets, inheritance, and spiritual continuity. The empire's strength did not rest only in crowns and gold. It rested in the unseen structures that held society together. To understand how Mali truly worked, we must step beyond the throne. We must look to the women who made rule possible. And that story comes next. Chapter 7, Women, Lineage, and Power in Mali. 1300 CE. The story of Mali is often told through its rulers, but power in Mali did not belong to men alone. Behind the Mansas stood women, who shaped lineage, legitimacy, and the stability of the empire. In Mali, inheritance followed bloodlines that passed through women. A ruler's right to govern was tied to his mother's status. If the maternal line was not recognized, the claim to power could be challenged. Women were the gatekeepers of legitimacy. They preserved royal bloodlines. They protected succession. They ensured continuity. One of the most influential figures was the Queen Mother. She advised rulers privately. She influenced court decisions. She mediated disputes between nobles, and she protected the future of the dynasty. Her authority was not symbolic. It was political. Women also held power outside the royal court. They controlled key sectors of the economy, markets, textiles, food distribution, craft production, gold weighing and exchange. Trade did not function without them. Some women managed large households that operated like economic institutions. Others organized trade networks that extended across regions. Wealth moved through women's hands. As often as it moved through men's, women were also spiritual authorities. Before, during, and after Islam spread, traditional belief systems remained strong. Priestesses, diviners, healers, ancestral custodians, these women guided ceremonies, protected sacred knowledge, and maintained harmony between people and land. Islam did not erase these roles. Instead, Mali blended systems. Some women practiced Islamic scholarship. Others preserved ancestral traditions. Many moved between both worlds. This balance helped Mali remain stable across generations. Even foreign travelers noticed. Writers like Ibn Battuta commented on the visibility and independence of West African women. They moved freely. They owned property. They spoke openly. They held influence. This was unusual to outsiders, but normal in Mali, because Mali understood something essential. An empire cannot last. If power is locked in one hand, it must be shared, balanced, rooted in community. As Mali expanded its influence, this balance between male authority and female power became one of its greatest strengths. Chapter 8: Scholarship and Writing in Mali. 1300 CE. Mali was not only wealthy, it was educated, knowledge was treated as power, and learning was protected by the state. At the center of Mali's intellectual life stood Timbuktu. By the 1300s, Timbuktu was more than a trade city. It was a center of writing, debate, and study. Scholars came from across West Africa and beyond the Sahara to learn, teach, and exchange ideas. Schools and libraries flourished. Manuscripts filled private homes, mosques, and learning centers. Today, historians estimate that over 700,000 manuscripts were produced or preserved in the Mali world. These writings covered law, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history, poetry, and theology. This was not a society without writing. It was a society that chose how it wrote. Arabic became the dominant written language, not because African knowledge was weak, but because Arabic connected Mali to wider trade, scholarship, and diplomacy. Arabic allowed scholars to communicate across regions, record contracts and law, and preserve texts in a shared script. But this did not erase African knowledge. Much of Mali's wisdom already lived in oral systems. Griots memorized genealogies, laws, histories, and spiritual teachings. With precision passed down for generations, oral knowledge was trusted. It was living. Writing was often reserved for law, scholarship, and diplomacy. While oral tradition guided daily life, identity, and memory, some African languages were written, but many were preserved through voice rather than script. This choice mattered. Oral systems allowed flexibility, adaptation, and community control over knowledge. Writing fixed ideas in place, memory kept them alive. In Mali, both systems worked together. Scholarship did not replace tradition, it complemented it, and Timbuktu stood as proof that African societies valued learning, debate, and preservation of knowledge on their own terms. What survived was not accidental. It was protected. What was spoken was not forgotten. It was carried. Mali wasn't primitive. They were scholars and beyond. Chapter 9: Science, Medicine, and African Knowledge Systems. 1300s to 1600s CE. Mali's power was not built on gold alone. It was built on understanding. Long before laboratories and textbooks, knowledge in Mali was lived, practiced, and observed. Science was not separated from daily life. It was embedded in it. Healers studied plants. Midwives studied the body. Farmers studied soil, rain, and seasons. Astronomers studied the sky. This was African science, practical, precise, and tested over generations. Medicine in Mali relied on herbal knowledge passed down through lineages. Roots for fever, leaves for infection, resins for pain, minerals for healing wounds. Healers understood dosage. They understood timing. They understood balance. Treatment was not just physical. It was social, spiritual, environmental. Illness was seen as imbalance between the body, the community, and the natural world. And restoring health meant restoring harmony. Time itself was carefully measured. Malian scholars tracked seasons through the movement of stars. They knew when floods would come, when planting should begin, when ceremonies should be held. Astronomy guided agriculture, travel, and ritual life. The sky was a calendar. Not superstition, but observation. Stars were mapped through memory and oral instruction. Knowledge was taught face to face, elder to student. Master to apprentice. This protected accuracy. It also protected responsibility. Not everyone received every teaching. Some knowledge required maturity, discipline, ethical grounding. Science in Mali was not detached. It carried obligation. Ritual played a role not as magic, but as structure. Ritual marked time. Transitions, birth, death. Leadership, it organized society. It reminded people of order, that humans were part of a larger system. Land, sky, water, community. Together, by the 1400s and 1500s, these systems coexisted with written scholarship. Oral science and written science were not enemies. They reinforced each other. What was written preserved memory. What was spoken preserved wisdom. Mali did not separate science from meaning. And that may be why so much of its knowledge endured, because it was not locked in buildings. It lived in people. Chapter 10, Spiritual Systems and Sacred Order in Mali, 1300s to 1600s CE. In Mali, spirituality was not separate from life. It shaped medicine. It guided leadership, and it defined right and wrong. At the center of Malian belief was Ma'ingala, the supreme creator. Ma'ingala was not human, not male or female, not confined to images or temples. Ma'ingala was the source of all life, all order, and all balance. From Ma'ingala came the universe, and from the universe came humanity. Below the creator were powerful spiritual forces, often called Niyama, the living energy present in people, nature, and the unseen world. Niyama could heal. It could protect, and if misused, it could destroy. This is why knowledge mattered. Healers understood plants, roots, and minerals, but they also understood spirit. Astronomers studied the movement of the stars, not for curiosity, but to track time, seasons, and destiny. Ritual specialists observed the sky to know when to plant, when to travel, and when to hold ceremony. Nothing was random. Even illness was not seen as meaningless. Disease could come from imbalance between body and spirit, between people and nature, between action and consequence. Spiritual leaders helped restore harmony, but spirituality was not chaos. It was structured, it had rules, it had boundaries, and those spiritual laws shaped Mali's justice system. If Ma'ingala was ordered, then society had to reflect that order. Wrongdoing was not just a crime against people. It was a disruption of balance. Justice was about restoration, not cruelty. Punishment existed, but so did reconciliation. Because to break harmony was to invite disorder into the world. And Mali understood something deeply. A society that loses its moral center cannot survive its wealth. This belief, rooted in spirituality, became the foundation of Mali's laws, its courts, and its idea of justice. And that is where the story moves next. From sacred order to law, justice, and moral responsibility. Chapter 11, Law, Justice, and Moral Order in Mali, 1300s to 1600s CE. Justice in Mali did not begin with written law. It began with balance. By this point, Mali's people already understood Ma'ingala, the principle that order in society mirrored order in the universe. Because of this, justice was not something shouted. It was something maintained. There were no stone court buildings dominating cities, no public spectacles of punishment, no obsession with fear as a tool of control. Instead, Mali relied on customary law, oral codes, and communal responsibility. Disputes were handled through elders, lineage heads, and councils who understood local history, family ties, and spiritual consequence. Wrongdoing was not viewed as crime against the state. It was a break in harmony that had to be repaired. Punishment aimed at restoration. Compensation, public reconciliation. Return of stolen goods, oaths before the community. And when harmony could not be restored, Mali preferred exile. Being removed from land, lineage, and community was considered a severe consequence, but one that preserved life. There is little to no evidence of regular executions in Mali between the 1300s and 1600s. Some accounts mention rare cases, usually tied to extreme betrayal or repeated offenses, but they are not central to Mali's justice system. This matters because during the same period, many societies across Europe and Asia relied heavily on executions, public torture, and spectacle punishment. To enforce obedience, Mali chose restraint, exile over death, repair over revenge. Balanced over brutality, justice was spoken aloud, remembered, and enforced through moral weight, not terror. Law in Mali was not written on stone walls. It was written into people, into memory, into obligation, into the understanding that order must be preserved for society to survive. And that belief that justice should protect life, not glorify death, was one of Mali's quiet strengths. Chapter 12, Mali's Golden Age, 1300 CE to 1600 CE. By the early 1300s, the Mali Empire entered its golden age. This was the period when Mali reached its greatest size, its greatest wealth, and its greatest global influence, not because of one ruler alone, but because of a line of Manses who understood balance between power and law, wealth and responsibility, tradition and change. One of the earliest figures tied to this era was Mansa Abu Bakr II, who ruled around 1311 CE. According to later accounts recorded by al-Humari, Abu Bakr II abdicated the throne to lead a massive Atlantic expedition. He left Mali stable enough to survive his departure. That stability mattered. It meant Mali's systems were strong, not dependent on a single man. After him came the most well-documented ruler of Mali's history, Mansa Musa, who ruled from 1312 CE to 1337 CE. Under his reign, Mali's wealth became known across North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, but gold alone did not define this age. Mansa Musa invested heavily in cities, in learning, and in administration. Timbuktu, Garo, and Niani expanded as centers of scholarship and governance. After Musa, the Golden Age did not immediately end. Mansa Magone I and Mansa Suleiman, who ruled from 1341 CE to 1360 CE, maintained Mali's authority. Suleiman in particular focused on internal stability, law, and disciplined governance. Later rulers struggled with succession disputes, but Mali's institutions endured for centuries. Mali remained a reference point for power in West Africa, even as influence slowly shifted after the 1400s. The legacy of this golden age lived on, in trade networks, in scholarship, and in political models adopted by later empires. Mali's golden age was not a moment. It was a long season, built by multiple hands, guided by law, and remembered by the world. Chapter 13, The Decline of Mali, 1400s to 1600 CE. Empires do not collapse all at once. They weaken slowly. Mali's decline did not begin with invasion. It began with leadership. after the height of Mali's golden age. The system that once balanced wealth, unity, and authority started to fracture. Strong leadership had kept Mali centralized, but over time, succession disputes weakened that center. Multiple claimants competed for power, provincial governors gained independence, and loyalty to the core began to fade. As authority weakened, control over trade weakened with it. Caravans relied on stability, merchants followed protection, and Mali could no longer guarantee either everywhere at once. This created openings, not through conquest, but through choice. Traders began favoring safer routes. Regional powers gained leverage, and Mali's grip on long-distance commerce loosened. Just as it had happened before in Ghana, economic power began shifting away from the old center. Environmental pressure added to the strain. Drought affected agriculture. Population movement increased, and border regions became harder to manage. Mali still existed. It still ruled territory, but it no longer controlled the system that made it dominant. Cities like Timbuktu changed hands. Trade hubs became contested, and Mali transitioned from empire to regional power. Yet this was not failure. It was transformation. The political systems Mali inherited from Ghana did not disappear. They adapted. Administrative knowledge, trade strategy, military organization, and governance models moved again, this time into newer powers rising along the Niger. One of those powers was Songhai. Just as Mali once carried Ghana forward, Songhai would carry Mali forward, not as a copy, but as an evolution. Because in West Africa, empires did not vanish. They moved, and the story continues.